At 1 o'clock in the morning, my porch light flickered across the front yard of my small house in Riverton, Arizona. The night air was dry, still carrying the faint hum of motorcycles from kids racing down the highway. Then came the pounding on my door. It wasn't the kind of knock that asked politely. It was frantic, uneven, desperate. "Mom, please, open up." I froze. It was Lena, my daughter. I pulled open the deadbolt, and before I could take a breath, she collapsed into my arms. Her lip was split, her left eye swollen shut, her hands clutched her stomach as if to hold herself together. In that moment, my body chose instinct over thought. I carried her inside, laid her on the sofa, and covered her with the nearest blanket. Then I looked up at the corner of my hallway where my police uniform hung pressed and ready. I knew tonight I wasn't just a mother, I was also an officer, and both would be tested. I should tell you who we are before the rest of this story unfolds. My name is Patricia Calder, but most people in Riverton call me Pat. I have worked as a patrol sergeant in this desert town for over 2 decades. Riverton isn't big, but it's the kind of place where everyone thinks they know everyone else's business. Rumors travel faster than the monsoon winds. My daughter Lena is 26. She grew up chasing lizards in our backyard, singing along to every song on the radio, and promising me she would always find her way back home. Lately she had grown quieter, more withdrawn, but I convinced myself it was just the stress of adulthood. I wanted to believe she was fine. There's one more piece you should know. My father left us a piece of land outside town. He worked hard for it, and it now stands in Lena's name. That land would soon become the center of a storm we never expected. The sound of Lena's voice still echoed in my ears as I tried to steady her trembling body. Her face was pale, her breath shallow. I fetched a damp towel from the kitchen and gently pressed it against her split lip, whispering for her to stay calm. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my head. I knew this was more than a bruise or two. Something had been broken long before she collapsed on my porch. I reached for my phone and dialed the number to the emergency room. "Dr. Patel, it's Pat Calder. Get a bed ready. I'm bringing my daughter. My car was in the shop, so I called for a cab." While we waited, Lena's phone lit up on the coffee table, buzzing again and again. On the screen were missed calls and threatening messages from Eric, her husband. My blood boiled. One message read, "Don't open your mouth if you want to keep everything." I reached for the phone, but Lena snatched it back with shaking hands. "Mom, don't. Please. It will only make it worse." Her voice was ragged, soaked with fear. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but instead I just squeezed her hand. "I'm here, honey. You're safe now." Inside, I made a silent promise this night would not pass without a record. We were starting a paper trail he couldn't erase. When we arrived at Riverton General, the fluorescent lights of the emergency room cut through the night like a blade. Dr. Anika Patel, a woman I had worked with on countless late-night calls, met us at the door. Her eyes moved quickly from Lena's swollen face to the way she held her side. Without hesitation, she guided us to an exam room. Nurses helped Lena onto the bed. They checked her vitals, gently lifted her blouse, and gasped at the dark bruise spreading across her stomach. Dr. Patel ordered X-rays and a CT scan to rule out internal bleeding. She moved with calm precision, but I saw the concern in her eyes. As Lena was prepped, I quietly asked the charge nurse for a copy of every photo, every note that would go into her medical record. "I need documentation," I said softly. She nodded. This wasn't the first time she had seen a case like this. While machines hummed in the background, Lena squeezed my hand, whispering, "Don't let him find me." I leaned close, my voice steady. "He won't. Not while I'm breathing." Before sunrise, we had discharge papers, imaging results, and a folder of medical photographs sealed for evidence. It was not just treatment, it was testimony written in ink and images. I tucked the file under my arm and walked out of the hospital knowing this was only the beginning. Back at home, the first rays of sun stretched across the street. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Dolores Park, sweeping her front walk. She paused when she saw me and hurried over, her face lined with worry. "Pat, I heard pounding and crying last night. Is everything all right?" I hesitated for a moment, then told her the truth in a low voice. It was Lena. Eric hurt her. She came here in the middle of the night. Dolores's jaw tightened, her broom clutched like a weapon. "That man has no shame," she muttered. Then her eyes lit with sudden purpose. "My porch camera records everything. Maybe it caught her arriving." Together we opened the app on her phone. There it was, 1:02 a.m., Lena knocking weakly at my door, her voice faint but desperate. Hearing those sobs again made my chest ache, but I also knew this was crucial. I asked Dolores to send me a copy. She pressed my hand. "Whatever you need, I'll testify." Back inside, I saved the footage onto an encrypted drive in a backup folder on my laptop. For the first time, I felt the scales tip. We had evidence outside my word, outside my daughter's fear. Proof had begun to take shape. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from Caleb Morton, a clerk I had known for years at the county records office. His voice was tense. "Pat, your name and Lena's just showed up on a land transfer file. It didn't sit right with me, so I thought I should warn you." My stomach tightened. "What transfer?" Caleb sighed. "According to the paperwork, your daughter signed her piece of property over to a woman named Tara Quinn. But Pat, the signatures look wrong, and the notary on the stamp wasn't even on duty that day." I drove straight to his office. Caleb slid a folder across the desk. The shaky handwriting on the page didn't resemble Lena's. My own name was scribbled too, awkward and slanted. It was a forgery in plain sight. "This came in from Eric," Caleb whispered. "He told the staff you asked him to file it because you were busy." I clenched the folder until my knuckles whitened. My father had worked himself ragged to secure that land. It was Lena's inheritance, a piece of our family's story. Now Eric was trying to steal it with a pen. I asked Caleb for certified copies of every page. He nodded quickly but warned, "Be careful. Someone inside helped push this through." Walking out with the file under my arm, I knew we weren't just fighting bruises anymore. We were up against lies written in ink. The next morning I drove to Malloy's Trading Post, the pawn shop Eric ran on the edge of town. The place smelled of motor oil and stale cigarettes. Two of his buddies leaned against the counter, their eyes narrowing as I walked past. One smirked. "Well, if it isn't the mother-in-law." I ignored him and pushed through the office door. Eric was behind a battered desk, counting stacks of bills. He looked up with a mocking grin. "Sergeant Calder, you here to buy or to nag?" I set a folder on the desk and slid it across to him. Inside were the photos of Lena's injuries, the ER report, still frames from Dolores's camera, and the forged deed Caleb had given me. Each page was a nail in his coffin. Eric's grin faltered for just a second, then returned. "And what do you expect me to do with this? I've got better lawyers than you." I met his eyes, my voice steady. "I don't expect you to do anything. The court will handle it." He leaned forward, voice sharp. "That girl of yours needed discipline. Don't think your badge will always save you." The words made my blood boil, but I stayed still. I gathered the file, stood, and looked him squarely in the eye. "From now on, it's not your rules, it's the law." Then I walked out, leaving his anger echoing behind me. By the end of the week, the gossip mill in Riverton was churning at full speed. At the farmer's market, I caught whispers trailing behind me. "She's just a cop using her badge to get even with her son-in-law." At the diner, I overheard, "Lena probably made the whole thing up." You know how young wives are, each word stung like a thorn, but I kept walking head high. That night, when I returned home, I found an unmarked envelope shoved under my front door. Inside was a scrap of paper, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "Shut up or you'll lose your daughter." My hands trembled as I read it. But not from fear, from fury. I slipped the note into the evidence folder, knowing one day it would be read under oath. I called Captain Joel Ramirez, my superior at the station. "We need extra patrols near my neighbor Dolores Park's house. Lena is staying there, and I won't risk Eric's men sniffing around." His voice was firm but carried a hint of concern. "Pat, you're walking a dangerous line, but I'll cover you. Just keep everything documented." The rumors grew louder, but so did my determination. I realized the battle wasn't just against Eric, it was against the story he was spreading to bury the truth. I knew the case would stay weak unless someone from Eric's inner circle came forward. That person was Tara Quinn, the woman who had been parroting on his arm while Lena nursed bruises at home. I learned she often spent evenings at the Silver Spur, a dimly lit bar at the far end of Hidalgo Street. One Thursday night, I put on an old jacket and cap, slipped into a corner booth, and waited. Around 10, Tara walked in wearing a red dress, her lips painted dark, a drink in her hand. She looked confident, but her eyes carried the weight of someone in over her head. I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were copies of the forged deed with her name on it and public records of her debts. "Eric can't protect you," I said quietly. "But the truth might." She laughed at first, but her hand trembled as she flipped through the papers. The color drained from her face. He promised me land, a new start. I see now he just used me. Leaning closer, I told her, you have one chance to walk away clean. Testify. Tell the court what really happened. Tara hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll do it, but you have to promise I'll be safe. For the first time, I felt the tide begin to turn. Back at Marcus Hale's law office, we spread the evidence across a long oak table. Photos of Lina's bruises, the ER report with Dr. Patel's signature, Dolores's video clip, the threatening note, and now the forged deed with Tara's name. Piece by piece, it formed a wall Eric could not climb. Marcus spoke with the calm focus of a man who had built cases like this before. Exhibit A, medical records. Exhibit B, the video. Exhibit C, the texts and threats. Exhibit D, the fraudulent deed and notary inconsistencies. He tapped each file as if anchoring it to the table. I added copies of Tara's written statement, notarized that morning, promising to testify about Eric's pressure and false promises. Marcus looked at me and said, "This gives us leverage, but we need protection orders in place immediately." That same afternoon, Judge Keaton signed a temporary restraining order, barring Eric from contacting Lina or Tara. Captain Ramirez arranged safe lodging for both women, away from Eric's reach. For the first time in weeks, I slept without pacing the hallway. The case was no longer a scattered set of fears, it was a structured defense, a living shield of fact. Rumors could twist, but evidence stood firm. The courthouse was packed the morning of the hearing. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of neighbors, co-workers, and strangers curious to see what would unfold. The air buzzed with whispers until Judge Raymond Keaton entered and called the room to order. Marcus Hale rose first. "Your Honor, this case is not about rumor. It is about records, injuries, and evidence that speaks for itself." He began with the medical file. Dr. Patel took the stand, explaining Lina's contusions and why they could not have come from a simple fall. Her testimony was calm, clinical, and devastating. Next came the video. On the screen, Dolores's porch camera showed Lina at 1:02 a.m. knocking weakly, her voice breaking through the quiet street. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as people saw with their own eyes what words alone could not capture. Then Marcus presented the threatening text messages. Each message was authenticated by phone logs. The words glared from the projector, "Don't open your mouth if you want to keep everything." The forged deed followed. Clerk Caleb Morton testified to the inconsistencies, pointing out the notary stamp that did not match official logs. It was irrefutable proof that Eric had tried to steal the Calder family land. Finally, Tara Quinn stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she told the truth. "Eric promised me a share if I signed the papers. He said Lina would never fight back. But he lied to me, and he lied to her." Eric shot up from his chair, shouting, "You traitor." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order." When it was my turn, I stood tall in my uniform. "I am a police officer, but today I am here as a mother. The man who hurt my daughter and forged our names is not a protector. He is an abuser, and the law must answer." Eric's lawyer, Victor Ames, tried to twist the narrative, suggesting extortion and bias, but each rebuttal fell against the hard surface of documented proof. By the time Marcus closed, the room was silent. The evidence had spoken louder than the gossip ever could. Everyone knew the truth. Judge Keaton returned after a long pause, his voice steady as he read the ruling. First, a protective order for Lina, guaranteeing Eric could not contact her under any circumstance. Second, the deed transfer to Tara Quinn was nullified, restoring the property to its rightful owner. Third, every one of Eric's assets was frozen pending investigation. Finally, the judge referred the case to the district attorney's office to pursue charges of domestic violence, fraud, and witness intimidation. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered prayers under their breath. Eric slumped back in his chair, his face drained of color. His attorney shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. Two deputies approached and snapped handcuffs around Eric's wrists. The sound of metal clicking shut rang through the room like a final verdict. As they led him out, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, once smug and unshaken, now clouded with panic. I reached for Lina's hand. She was trembling, but for the first time in weeks, she exhaled a breath that sounded like freedom. Justice had not erased her pain, but it had carved out a path toward safety. In the weeks that followed, life didn't simply return to normal. Healing rarely moves in straight lines. Lina often woke in the middle of the night, her body jolting upright from nightmares. Sometimes she cried out, convinced Eric was at the door. Each time I sat by her side, holding her hand until her breathing slowed. Dr. Naomi Winters, the therapist Marcus recommended, began meeting with Lena twice a week. Slowly, Lena learned grounding exercises, counting objects in the room, steadying her breath, writing down her fears instead of burying them. It wasn't magic, but it gave her tools to face the darkness. Small victories appeared like scattered sunlight. Lena walked to the store alone without scanning every doorway. She cooked dinner and hummed along to an old song she once loved. The first time I heard her laugh again, it caught me off guard and nearly brought me to tears. As for me, I carried this case into my daily patrols. Each time I met a woman afraid to speak, I shared resources, a phone number, or simply a listening ear. I wanted them to know silence feeds the pain, but truth, even slow, even heavy, can set a person free. If you are listening to this and parts of Lena's story feel familiar, I want you to know there are practical steps you can take. First, if you are in immediate danger, call emergency services. Your safety comes before everything else. Second, document what is happening. Take photos of injuries with a phone or camera that records date and time. Save threatening texts or voicemails and back them up to a cloud folder or an external drive. Small details can become powerful evidence later. Third, seek medical help. Ask for printed discharge summaries and make sure the records describe every injury. Hospitals often take photos that can be stored in your file. Ask for copies or reference numbers. Fourth, check public property records. If you suspect fraud, request certified copies of deeds and compare signatures. Notary logs can reveal inconsistencies that matter in court. Finally, reach out for support. Domestic violence hotlines, advocacy groups, and legal aid services exist in many communities. You don't have to go through this alone. Even if you feel isolated, there are people and systems ready to stand with you when you choose to speak. When I look back at that night, I don't see victory. I see a daughter who found the courage to knock on my door, and a mother who chose to fight with the tools of the law, instead of anger. Putting on my uniform that morning wasn't about revenge. It was about keeping a promise that the law is meant to protect the vulnerable, even when the offender sits at your own family table. If this story resonated with you, share it. Leave a comment with the city you're watching from. Someone else might read your words and feel less alone. And remember, silence only serves those who harm. Speaking up, however hard, can open the door to safety and hope. The chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom, their light glinting off crystal glasses and sequined gowns. Gloria Townsend sat at a round table near the edge of the crowd, her posture straight, her silver hair pulled neatly into a bun that spoke of dignity earned over decades. She had presided over hundreds of trials in her lifetime, her gavel once commanding silence in federal courtrooms. Tonight, however, she was a guest in her son's world, and she had been forced to play a different role. Across the room, Olivia Townsend leaned toward a cluster of well-dressed guests. With her diamond earrings catching the light, she let out a tinkling laugh that carried farther than she intended. "She is too senile to know how much money she has," Olivia said, her voice sharp beneath the sugar. The circle of New York's social elite laughed politely, some uncomfortably, others with genuine amusement. One of them even added, "Yesterday she asked if Reagan was still president." The laughter grew louder. Gloria's expression remained calm. She let her gaze linger on the towering floral centerpiece before her, as though she were distracted. Beneath the tablecloth, however, her fingers pressed against a small recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. She clicked it once, the softest sound swallowed by the music of the string quartet. The words had been captured. Evidence mattered more than outrage. 30 years in the judicial system had taught her that truth required proof, not emotion. A waiter approached with a bottle of champagne. "More champagne, Mrs. Townsend?" he asked. Olivia's glass was already half empty, yet she nodded with a smile. Gloria shook her head gently. Her eyes, seemingly unfocused, swept the room in silence. She noted who sat with Olivia, who laughed, and who avoided her gaze. Every detail mattered. This was not simply a dinner party. It was the opening act of a case that had already begun. Inside her mind, Gloria heard the echo of her own voice from years past. Court is now in session. Tonight, though the setting was a ballroom, the trial had already started, and the defendants did not yet realize they were standing before the judge. 6 weeks earlier, Gloria Townsend had woken to the sterile white of a hospital room. The memory of tumbling down her townhouse staircase replayed in fragments, her hand slipping from the banister, the sickening crack of bone, the blur of paramedics lifting her from the hardwood floor. Doctors called it an accident, the kind that happened too easily to someone her age. Yet Gloria could not shake the timing. She had mentioned to her son Daniel, just one day earlier, that she planned to review the family's charitable foundation documents, records her late husband had treasured. Hours later, she was broken and bedridden. When she was discharged, Daniel insisted she could not live alone. "Mother, it's safer if you stay with us." Olivia nodded eagerly, her hand resting on his arm as if echoing his concern. They moved her into their sprawling Upper East Side mansion, a place that smelled faintly of fresh paint and ambition. A room on the second floor became hers, once a private study now refitted with a hospital bed, cameras in the corners, and a lock that clicked each night from the outside. At first, Gloria tried to convince herself it was care, not control. Olivia fussed over medication schedules, offering pills with a practiced smile. Nurses rotated through shifts, all hired personally by her daughter-in-law. Visitors were screened, phone calls accidentally disconnected, letters opened before they reached her hands. Even her meals were timed, no more than what a patient should need. For a woman who had commanded courtrooms, the restrictions cut deeper than any broken bone. One evening she asked about returning home to recover where she felt comfortable. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Olivia. "Your townhouse is too dangerous now," he said firmly. "We'll take care of everything here." The words echoed like a sentence passed down from a bench, final, unyielding. Lying in bed that night, Gloria studied the bars of moonlight slicing through her window. She realized she was not a guest in her son's home, she was an inmate in a polished cage. And as she listened to the faint sound of a key turning in the lock, she promised herself that this confinement would not be the end of her story. It would be the beginning of her case. The days in the Townsend mansion followed a careful rhythm, every moment managed as if Gloria were incapable of deciding for herself. Yet beneath the polished routines, she began to notice cracks. The pills Olivia offered looked slightly different from those her doctor had prescribed. Some made her drowsy, others left her head strangely foggy. Years on the bench had trained her to notice details. She began tucking certain tablets under her tongue, spitting them discreetly into tissues later. Clarity was worth the discomfort. One morning, while Olivia was distracted by a delivery at the door, Gloria spotted a folder left carelessly on the sideboard. Inside were letters between Daniel and Judge Howard Pierce, a longtime acquaintance from the New York legal circuit. The language was coded but clear enough for her trained eye. They spoke of expedited approvals for coastal real estate developments, of ensuring signatures on sensitive documents. Her chest tightened. Pierce was the very judge she had once suspected of questionable dealings. Now he was in correspondence with her own son. Gloria's heart ached as she pieced together the picture. The push for her early retirement 3 years ago, the sudden accident, and now her confinement, it was all connected. She realized with a chill that she was not simply being sheltered, she was being silenced. That evening, Daniel entered her room with the air of a man checking inventory. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked, his tone practiced. Gloria answered softly, masking her thoughts behind a faint smile. "Fine, Daniel, just tired." He seemed satisfied, and that was all she needed. He believed her frailty was real. Later, as she rested against the pillows, Gloria noticed a pair of young eyes watching from the hallway. Emily Townsend, her 16-year-old granddaughter, lingered by the door. Unlike her parents, Emily's gaze held no calculation, only worry. Gloria smiled faintly and Emily returned it before slipping away. It was a small moment, but enough. Gloria had spent her career dissecting motives, reading juries, and measuring truth. In Emily's glance she recognized honesty. In Olivia's careful control she saw manipulation. And in Daniel's polite questions, she saw betrayal. Quietly, she began to prepare not just as a mother, but as a judge gathering evidence for the most personal case of her life. The mansion was quiet at night, the kind of silence that made every creak of wood sound like an alarm. Gloria lay awake, her hips still aching from the fall, her mind sharper than she dared let anyone believe. The cameras in the corners blinked faintly, and the hallway lights spilled under her locked door. She had mapped the routine, the guard's footsteps every half hour, the nurse's rounds just before midnight, the subtle check of Olivia's heels clicking on the marble floor. Across the garden, a faint glow burned in an upstairs window. Emily's room. Gloria reached for the small vanity mirror she kept tucked beside her bed. Slowly, carefully, she angled it toward the moonlight and began to flash. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS, a signal from summers long ago, when she had taught her granddaughter Morse code as a game at their beach house. She waited, holding her breath, the seconds stretching endlessly. Then Emily's light flickered. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. Gloria's lips curved into the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in weeks. She was not alone. The next day, during a supervised crossword puzzle session, one of the few activities Olivia permitted, Gloria leaned slightly closer. "Do your parents check your messages?" she whispered. Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "They put controls on my phone, but not on my school tablet," she murmured back. Gloria nodded faintly, her eyes pretending to study the crossword, but heart pounding with renewed strength. That night, as Olivia locked her in again, Gloria stared out the window. The Morse code signal had bridged the walls of her confinement. It was not just a flicker of light, but a lifeline. For years she had told juries that truth had a way of finding its way to the surface. Now she believed it again, because in the eyes of a 16-year-old girl, she had found her first ally. From that moment on, Gloria understood that survival depended on appearances. If Daniel and Olivia believed she was slipping into confusion, she would let them. Every stumble over a name, every misplaced object, every vacant stare became part of her performance. The more convincing her act, the more careless they would become. At breakfast, Olivia corrected her gently when she called Daniel by his father's name. Gloria lowered her eyes and murmured an apology. In reality, she was cataloging every expression, every exchange, like evidence marked for trial. Later that afternoon, she deliberately poured tea onto the tablecloth, feigning embarrassment as Olivia dabbed it up with a triumphant smile. Good, Gloria thought, let her believe. Each night she wrote down details in a small notebook hidden inside the hollow spine of an old law book on her shelf. Times, dates, overheard conversations, all recorded in a steady hand. She remembered telling young attorneys that cases were built on patterns, not moments. Now she was building her own pattern, brick by brick, in secret. Daniel often visited, his tone clipped with impatience disguised as concern. "Mom, you really should let us manage your accounts. You don't need the stress." Gloria responded with a soft nod, eyes clouded just enough to satisfy him. Inside, her resolve hardened. Every lie he told her was another thread in the net he was weaving, and another thread she could pull loose. Emily noticed. During their crossword lessons, she caught her grandmother's fleeting glances of sharp awareness. Gloria would offer a tiny wink before resuming her act, and Emily's lips would twitch with a hidden smile. They both knew the performance was working. Lying awake one evening, Gloria thought of her courtroom years. She had taught jurors to separate fact from deception, to look past the surface. Now she was the one wearing the mask. If her family wanted a confused old woman, she would give them one. But behind the mask, the judge was still present, gathering her case, waiting for the right moment to deliver her verdict. Gloria's quiet performance bought her time, but even the sharpest mind needs allies. The first came unexpectedly. Jack Turner, the family's driver, had a habit of opening the car door with a respectful nod, never looking at her with the pity that others did. One afternoon, as he helped her into the vehicle for a medical appointment, he leaned closer. "You don't remember me, do you, Judge Townsend?" Gloria blinked, feigning confusion. Jack smiled faintly. 10 years ago, Commonwealth v. Turner, you saw I was pressured into falsifying records. You gave me probation instead of prison. That second chance saved me." The memory returned sharply. She had seen the fear in his eyes back then, the desperation of a young man used as a pawn by powerful bankers. Now he was standing by her side again, not as a defendant but as an ally. He slipped a small phone into her lap as he closed the door. "Use this when you need me. No one else will know." Her second ally arrived in the form of Judge Martha Ellis, an old colleague who visited under the pretense of social courtesy. Olivia hovered nearby, pouring tea and asking scripted questions. When Martha casually mentioned her recent health troubles, Olivia excused herself quickly, uncomfortable with the topic. The moment she left, Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "Margaret Holloway sent me your message. Tell me everything." Gloria outlined the forged signatures, the altered medications, the plan to declare her incompetent. Martha listened with the sharp focus of a woman who had heard dozens of conspiracy cases. "We will build a counter case," she promised, "but we must be patient." That night, Gloria shared her secret connection with Emily. The girl's eyes lit up with determination. "Grandma, I'll help too. My parents don't know how much I've noticed." Gloria squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. Emily was too young to carry such burdens, yet here she was, braver than most adults Gloria had known. With Jack watching from the outside, Martha planning from the courts, and Emily as her eyes inside the mansion, Gloria finally felt the scales of justice begin to tip. The isolation that had threatened to suffocate her was breaking. Quietly, steadily, an alliance was forming in the shadows of her gilded prison. The forecast warned of a nor'easter barreling toward New York, with high winds and heavy rain expected to hammer the city. To most, it meant inconvenience. To Gloria, it meant opportunity. She had studied the security system for weeks. Cameras and alarms always faltered when the power cut out, taking nearly 3 minutes to switch over to backup generators. 3 minutes was all she needed. The storm arrived with fury. Rain lashed against the tall windows, and thunder shook the chandelier above her room. At exactly 9 o'clock, the lights flickered, then died. The mansion fell into sudden darkness, broken only by the dim red glow of emergency bulbs. Gloria counted the seconds in her head, steady as a clock. 1, 2, 3. Right on cue, a scream tore through the staircase. Emily. Gloria's heart pounded, though she knew it was part of their plan. Olivia rushed out of her room, heels clattering against marble, calling for the guard. Emily's voice wailed convincingly as if she had fallen. The hallway emptied. It was time. Gloria slid from her bed, gripping her crutches with practiced strength. Every step sent pain through her healing hip, but adrenaline carried her. She crossed to the painting of New York Harbor that hung above her writing desk. With trembling but deliberate fingers, she pressed along the frame until it clicked. The canvas swung open, revealing the safe her late husband had installed decades earlier. The combination lived in her memory, etched deeper than any scar. Slowly, she turned the dial. Left, right, left. The door swung open. Inside lay what they had wanted so desperately to hide: Robert Townsend's original will, its ink still crisp, bank statements tracing unauthorized transfers, and, most precious, handwritten letters from Robert explaining his wishes for the educational foundation they had built together. Proof, truth, justice waiting to be spoken. Gloria pulled out the miniature camera Martha had smuggled to her and began photographing each page, her hands steady as if she were back on the bench reading evidence. The storm roared on, covering the faint click of the shutter. 3 minutes passed. She replaced everything exactly as it had been, closed the safe, and straightened the painting. When the power surged back and lights returned, Gloria was sitting calmly in her chair, a faint smile tugging her lips. The first true strike in her case had been made. The morning after the storm, the mansion buzzed with tension. Olivia scolded Emily for her supposed clumsiness. Daniel barked instructions to staff about checking locks and power lines, and Gloria sat quietly, feigning fatigue. Inside her pocket, however, rested the memory card holding every image she had captured the night before. It was the weight of truth, and she carried it like a weapon. Later that day, a new doctor arrived. He introduced himself as Dr. Kenneth Goldstein, a renowned psychiatrist. Daniel made a show of shaking his hand, speaking loudly so everyone could hear. "We need a definitive evaluation of my mother's mental state, doctor. She's been so confused." Olivia added, "She can't even manage her medication anymore." Gloria lowered her gaze, playing her role. "Let them believe." But Goldstein was not who Daniel thought. Years earlier, Gloria had served alongside him on a medical ethics committee. He recognized her at once. When Olivia left the room to fetch tea, Gloria's voice dropped, firm and deliberate. "Doctor, you know me. You know what they're doing." Goldstein met her eyes, then gave the smallest of nods. When Olivia returned, he resumed his professional mask. The evaluation lasted nearly an hour. Gloria answered some questions with clarity, others with calculated hesitation. She wanted the record to reflect not confusion, but consistency when tested thoroughly. At the end, Goldstein set down his pen. "In my professional opinion, Judge Townsend demonstrates full cognitive capacity. Any claim of incompetence is unfounded." Olivia's mouth fell open. Daniel's jaw tightened. Before they could protest, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the hallway. Federal agents in dark jackets entered, presenting search warrants. Olivia gasped. Daniel demanded answers, but his voice was drowned by the command, "FBI, step aside." Agents fanned through the mansion, seizing files, computers, and phones. One agent carried a box of documents straight from Daniel's office safe. Daniel turned to his mother, color draining from his face. "Mother, what is going on?" Gloria straightened in her chair, her eyes clear and unyielding. "This is no longer your courtroom, Daniel. But make no mistake, you are standing before a judge. Whether here or in federal court, you will address me as Your Honor." The federal courthouse loomed with familiar gravity as Gloria was wheeled into the gallery. It had been years since she sat in those benches, no longer as judge but as witness and victim. The courtroom was packed, attorneys, reporters, and officials curious about the downfall of Daniel Townsend, once a rising star in New York's legal world. Now he sat at the defense table, shoulders stiff in a tailored suit that suddenly looked too large for him. The prosecutor outlined the case with precision. For at least 3 years, Daniel and Judge Howard Pierce conspired to manipulate property approvals, funneling money through offshore accounts. The scheme had accelerated after Gloria's injury, when forged signatures and altered medical reports were used to prepare for her legal incapacitation. Olivia's role was smaller but clear: medication tampering, isolation, and deception designed to make Gloria appear unfit. Gloria listened without flinching, though her heart clenched at every mention of her son's name. She remembered holding him as a child, reading him stories about honor and fairness. Now those values had been twisted into ambition and greed. The judge presiding over the case, Martha Ellis, gave her a respectful nod from the bench, acknowledging both her past service and present ordeal. When the defense argued that Gloria's confusion had been genuine, the prosecutor introduced Dr. Goldstein's testimony. Calm and methodical, he dismantled their claims, describing Gloria's consistent clarity under thorough testing. Then came the evidence. Gloria had risked everything to capture the photographs of the original will, the bank transfers, and the audio recordings of Olivia mocking her senility. Each piece tightened the noose around Daniel's defense. Richard Townsend, Gloria's brother, took the stand next. His voice shook as he admitted to supporting Daniel's narrative because of his gambling debts. "I told myself we were protecting her," Richard whispered, "but I knew deep down it was wrong." The courtroom fell silent at his confession. When the judge denied Daniel's request for bail due to risk of tampering, Gloria felt a wave of mixed triumph and grief. She had won the opening battle, yet lost the son she once believed in. She sat straighter, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The law was doing its work, but inside her, the mother mourned what had been broken beyond repair. Months later, the courtroom was filled again, this time for sentencing. Daniel Townsend had accepted a plea deal after weeks of mounting evidence and mounting pressure. He would serve 7 years in federal prison, with parole eligibility after 5, contingent on his full cooperation in exposing the wider corruption network that included Judge Pierce. Olivia, convicted of elder abuse and medication tampering, received a lighter sentence but lost the glittering social life she had fought so hard to preserve. Her name, once whispered with admiration at Manhattan fundraisers, was now a cautionary tale. Gloria sat in the front row, cane at her side but posture unbowed. She listened to the proceedings with the same attentiveness she had once given to defendants in her own court. When asked if she wished to speak, she rose slowly, her voice clear. "Justice is not vengeance," she said. "It is accountability. My son betrayed the principles I lived my life by, but the law will guide him toward consequence and, perhaps, redemption." The room held its breath at her composure. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, but Gloria's focus was elsewhere. Emily stood beside her, fingers entwined with hers. The girl had chosen to live with her grandmother permanently, leaving behind the toxic atmosphere of her parents' home. Together they returned to Gloria's townhouse, restored and warm with life again. The Townsend Educational Foundation, once endangered, was fully revived. Scholarships were already being awarded to underprivileged students, each acceptance letter a quiet victory for Robert's legacy and for the fight Gloria had endured. The ripple effects spread further. Legislators passed new protections against elder financial exploitation, naming the bill the Townsend Act. Gloria, once the victim of a family conspiracy, now stood as a symbol of resilience and reform. She began mentoring young judges, sharing her story not as tragedy but as testimony that justice must be vigilant even within families. On quiet evenings, Gloria would sit in her study, law books stacked neatly, Emily reading nearby. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. Family can betray, she reflected, but truth endures. And justice, though delayed, always finds its way. She looked out at the city skyline, her heart steady. The judge had spoken not from the bench, but from her own life, and the verdict would echo long beyond her years. When I stepped into the courtroom that morning, my daughter Lena rolled her eyes and leaned toward her husband, Trent, whispering something that made them both smirk. But then, something unexpected happened. The judge lifted his head from the stack of papers, his eyes locking on me. His expression froze as if the past had walked into the room. In a hushed voice, barely audible, he said, "It's her." The entire courtroom went silent. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, clerks stopped typing, even the bailiff shifted nervously. Lena's smug look wavered, and Trent frowned with confusion. They had no idea what those two words meant, but I did. I had lived long enough to recognize when fate was about to turn. They thought I was just an old woman clinging to a house. They believed they had stripped me of every ounce of dignity. What they never realized was that I carried a story much older, much stronger than their greed. Every morning in Riverton began the same way for me. I rose at 6, poured water into my old kettle, and reached for the chipped mug that had survived more than 20 years of breakfasts. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen while I checked on the African violets lined up on the windowsill. My late husband Harold loved those flowers, and tending to them kept him close to me even after he was gone. My life was not extraordinary. It was a rhythm of small habits, each one stitched with memory and meaning. I had never traveled far or lived in luxury, but I had poured every ounce of myself into raising my daughter, Lena. I worked late nights cleaning offices, sold baked pies at church events, and mended dresses for neighbors, all to make sure she had opportunities I never knew. To most people I was just a quiet grandmother, but in my heart I carried decades of sacrifice. That Thursday evening was meant to be special. I had spent hours preparing Harold's favorite chicken and dumplings, the dish Lena used to beg for as a child. I laid out my embroidered tablecloth, the one I had worked on when Lena was a teenager, and placed fresh flowers in the center of the table. I wanted to remind her that this was still her home, filled with love and memories. When they arrived, Trent walked straight into Harold's old armchair, switched on the television, and acted as if the house belonged to him. Lena stood there in the green dress I had bought her, her expression as cold as winter air. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in a clipped tone that made her sound like a stranger. She announced that the house was too big for me, that I couldn't maintain it anymore, and that they needed it for their growing family. They had already found a retirement community perfect for someone my age. My voice trembled as I pleaded, reminding her this was where her father had died holding my hand, where every wall carried our story. But she only said, "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls." A few days later, Trent arrived without warning, bringing along a real estate appraiser in a gray suit. The man walked through my house as if it were all ready for sale. He measured rooms with quick, detached movements and scribbled notes on a clipboard. "The pipes are outdated," he said flatly. "The kitchen tiles are old-fashioned. This place would need a full renovation." I stood silently in the corner, clutching the edge of my apron. Those tiles he dismissed so casually had been placed one by Harold's hands when Lena was 10. I remembered the sweat on his brow, the patience in his smile, the hope in his voice as he told me, "This kitchen will last us a lifetime." And now it was being reduced to a line on a checklist. Lena followed the appraiser, nodding at his comments, never once looking at me. Each word felt like a hammer striking the walls of my heart. My home was no longer sacred to them. It was only property, numbers, and profit. The following week, they returned with a lawyer in tow. Trent carried himself like a man already in possession of the house, while Lena avoided meeting my eyes. The lawyer spread a stack of documents across my dining table and spoke with a rehearsed politeness. "Mrs. Whitaker, these are the transfer papers. Once you sign, the property will be in safe hands. Everything has been arranged for your comfort." I scanned the pages, the words blurring together. Transfer of ownership, permanent, irrevocable. My chest tightened as I realized this was not about selling the house to someone new. This was about taking it for themselves. When I refused, Trent's mask slipped. His tone hardened. "You're not in a condition to make decisions anymore, Nora. Lena is your heir. She's acting in your best interest." The lawyer added quietly, "If you don't cooperate, we may have to consider proceedings for mental incapacity." The room spun. My own daughter, the child I had worked myself ragged to raise, was preparing to strip me of everything I had left. My hands shook, but I forced the words out. "I'm not signing anything." That night, sleep would not come. I sat in Harold's armchair, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if they were right. Maybe I was too old, too fragile, too useless to stand in their way. The thought cut deeper than any insult Trent had ever thrown at me. My eyes wandered to the framed photos on the wall. Lena, as a baby in my arms, Harold smiling at her graduation, our family gathered around Christmas dinner. Every memory told me I had lived for others, given everything. Now I was being treated like a burden. I whispered into the quiet, "Harold, I don't know how to fight this alone." The next afternoon, as I wandered through the house like a ghost, I opened Harold's old desk drawer. It was mostly filled with faded bills, envelopes, and letters I had seen before. But tucked beneath them was a slim folder bound with a tiny lock. My breath caught. I had never noticed it in all these years. I searched the drawers, then the shelves, until I found a small brass key hidden inside one of Harold's favorite books about investing. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The folder creaked open, and inside was a stack of documents neatly arranged with Harold's initials on the corner. Most pages were contracts and statements I didn't fully understand, but one caught my attention instantly. It was a will, signed and dated just 6 months before Harold had passed. I sank into the chair as I began to read. Line by line, my reality shifted. Harold had been far more careful, far more deliberate than I had ever realized. And what Lena and Trent thought they could take from me was only a shadow of what Harold had left behind. Harold had never spoken much about money. I thought we lived on his modest salary and the little I earned from odd jobs. But as I flipped through the folder, the truth unfolded before me. For decades he had quietly invested every extra dollar buying small properties when prices were low, putting money into company stocks, even purchasing a piece of land outside Riverton that was now worth a fortune. The numbers on the statements made my head spin, but the greatest shock was yet to come. The building where Lena and Trent lived, the place they thought they were paying rent for each month, was ours. All those checks had been funneled into an account under Harold's name, now mine. For 2 years since his death, rent from every tenant had been quietly deposited, untouched, waiting for me. My heart pounded as I realized I wasn't just a widow clinging to a single house. Harold had left me an empire my daughter and her husband knew nothing about. At the bottom of the folder was an envelope addressed in Harold's familiar handwriting. My fingers shook as I unfolded the letter, and his voice seemed to rise from the page. "My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, then I am no longer by your side. Forgive me for keeping this secret, but I wanted it to be a gift for your later years. You worked harder than anyone I've ever known, and you gave everything for Lena and me. I wanted you to live without fear, to know you would always be safe. I must also tell you, I never fully trusted Trent. There is something in him that worries me, an ambition that has no heart. That is why I arranged the inheritance as I did. If Lena treats you with love and respect, she will share in this legacy. If not, you hold all the power to protect yourself. Use it wisely, not to hurt, but to teach." By dawn, I had made my decision. The tears from the night before had dried, replaced by a calm I hadn't felt in years. I brewed my coffee, watered the violets, and set the folder of documents neatly on Harold's old desk. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady, almost unshakable. When Lena and Trent arrived that morning with boxes and movers, expecting me to be packed and ready, they found me sitting in my armchair, sipping tea as if nothing in the world could bother me. "Mom, what are you doing?" Lena asked impatiently. "The movers are here." "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice even. Trent smirked, stepping closer, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Whitaker, you don't have a choice." I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. "You're right, Trent, I don't have a choice. But it turns out you don't either." The movers stood awkwardly in the hallway, waiting for instructions. Trent waved his hand toward them as if signaling troops. "Go on, start with the living room," he barked. "Not so fast," I interrupted, rising slowly from my chair. I walked to Harold's desk and picked up one of the deeds. "Did you know," I asked calmly, "that the apartment you've been living in for 3 years has never really belonged to you?" Trent's smirk faltered. "We pay rent every month," Lena said, confused. "Yes," I replied, "to a management company that transfers it directly to me, because I own the entire building." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the creak of the movers shifting on their feet. Lena stared at the paper in my hand, reading it again and again. Trent grabbed it from her, his face turning pale as the truth sank in. "This has to be fake," he snapped. "You're bluffing." "Check the records yourself," I said evenly. "You'll find I'm not bluffing at all." Trent's voice rose, anger spilling through his teeth. "Even if this is true, you can't stop us. We'll fight it in court. You'll lose everything." I folded my hands in front of me. "On the contrary, you have 30 days to find another place to live. After that, the law allows me to evict you." Lena gasped, her eyes filling with panic. "Mom, you can't mean that." "Family doesn't scheme to take away what isn't theirs. I answered firmly. You made your choice when you tried to push me out. Trent, desperate now, blurted out, Tell her, Lena. Tell her why she can't do this. Lena's lips trembled. Mom, I'm pregnant. The words pierced me deeper than any threat. I would be a grandmother, yet I was finding out like this used as a bargaining chip. For a brief moment my resolve wavered. But then Harold's letter echoed in my mind. Use it not to hurt, but to teach. I straightened my shoulders. Congratulations, Lena. But that doesn't erase what you've done. Lena's eyes brimmed with tears as she turned toward Trent. Maybe we should just apologize, try to make this right. Trent's face hardened. I will never bow to her. She's manipulating you. She's manipulating all of us. I stood quietly, letting his words hang in the air. The truth was finally showing itself. Trent, please, Lena pleaded, clutching his arm. She's my mother. We can't throw her out like garbage. No, he barked, shaking her hand away. You're weak if you give in. In that moment I saw something shift in Lena. For years she had echoed his voice, mirrored his disdain. Now she was staring at him as if she truly saw him for the first time. She turned back to me, her voice trembling. Mom, I was wrong. I let him convince me that you were a burden, and I believed him because it was easier than admitting I married the wrong man. I swallowed hard. Words are a beginning, Lena, but only actions will show me you've chosen differently. 2 weeks later, Trent returned in a rage. The building manager called up to my apartment, his voice nervous. Mrs. Whitaker, he's demanding to be let in. He says his wife is being held against her will. I went down to the lobby, calm as ever. Trent stood there, eyes bloodshot, the smell of alcohol heavy on his breath. He jabbed a finger toward me. You give me back my wife right now, or I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Lena is exactly where she wants to be, I replied evenly. And you are standing on my property, which means you'll leave now. He laughed bitterly. This isn't your building. Without a word I dialed my attorney Camille Current and put the call on speaker. Camille, could you confirm who owns this building? Of course, Nora, she said. You are the sole legal owner. The manager's eyes widened. Trent's mouth snapped shut. For the first time he had no answer. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. Trent had filed a lawsuit, claiming I had manipulated Lena, alienated her from him, and schemed to ruin their marriage. He even threatened to fight for custody of the baby. It was absurd, but I knew I needed to be ready. Camille gathered everything: text messages where Trent insulted Lena, voicemails where he threatened to leave her if she didn't push me into a retirement home, and sworn statements from neighbors who had heard his shouting through the walls. Piece by piece, the truth was documented. At the kitchen table, Camille coached me. Answer directly, Nora, no extra words. The truth speaks for itself. Beside me, Lena practiced too, her voice shaking as she read her statement. I betrayed my mother because Trent convinced me she was weak. I was wrong. Hearing her say it aloud was painful but necessary. The courtroom would demand nothing less than honesty. The morning of the trial arrived with heavy clouds. Trent strutted in with an expensive lawyer at his side, his confidence fueled by arrogance. He glanced at me with the same contempt I had seen for years, but this time I felt no fear. I had truth on my side. His attorney painted me as a bitter old woman who couldn't let go, a manipulative mother who used money to destroy her daughter's marriage. The words stung, but I sat silently, waiting. When it was our turn, Camille rose with calm authority. She laid out the evidence: text messages dripping with insults, recordings of threats, and witnesses ready to testify. Each piece struck like a hammer, and Trent's smirk began to fade. Then came the moment no one expected. The judge removed his glasses and looked at me closely. Mrs. Whitaker? Nora Whitaker? His voice softened. Do you remember me? 30 years ago, family court, Judge Harlan's office, you were the secretary who stayed late to help an overwhelmed intern. Recognition struck. Beneath the gray hair and stern demeanor was Marcus Ellery, the timid young man I had once encouraged. Marcus, I whispered, my throat tight. Of course I remember. The courtroom froze. Trent's lawyer stammered, claiming conflict of interest. But Judge Ellery's voice was steady. There is no conflict. There is only justice. And the evidence is clear. Mr. Maddox has been the manipulator all along. For the first time in years, the balance of power shifted entirely. Kindness, it seemed, had circled back when I least expected it. Judge Ellery's ruling was swift and decisive. He denied every one of Trent's claims, declaring there was no evidence that I had manipulated Lena or interfered in their marriage. Instead, he concluded that Trent had subjected both Lena and me to intimidation, coercion, and emotional abuse. The gavel struck, sealing the verdict. Trent was barred from approaching either of us, stripped of any parental rights until further review, and ordered to pay court costs as well as damages for the suffering he had caused. Trent's face turned ashen, his bravado gone. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but it was useless. The fight was over. Beside me, Lena wept quietly, relief washing over her. I placed my hand over hers, not as a victory gesture, but as a reminder that this was not the end. This was only the beginning of rebuilding what had been broken. Outside the courthouse steps, she clung to me, whispering, "Mom, we're free." Freedom did not erase the wounds. When Lena moved back into the house, the air between us was fragile, filled with unspoken questions. I set clear boundaries. "If you stay here, it won't be as a guest. You'll contribute, you'll be responsible, and you'll earn my trust back." She nodded, her eyes lowered. At first, the silence between us was heavy. We spoke only about daily necessities, the weather, the groceries, her morning sickness. Yet I noticed small changes. She washed her dishes immediately after meals, kept her old room neat, and even helped tend Harold's violets without being asked. One afternoon I found her folding laundry in the living room, something she had never done before. She looked up, nervous, and said, "I want you to see I can take care of things on my own." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Actions, I reminded myself, not words, would show whether my daughter had truly returned to me. As the months passed, I knew Harold's legacy could not remain only within our family. Too many women like me had been silenced, pushed aside, or stripped of their dignity by those they loved most. With Camille's guidance, I used part of the inheritance to establish the Second Porch Foundation, a refuge for older women facing abandonment or abuse. We called it Second Porch because every woman deserves another place to sit, to breathe, and to belong when her first porch has been taken away. Within the first year, we housed 15 women. Their stories were heartbreakingly familiar: children who sold their parents' homes without consent, siblings who claimed inheritances with lies, husbands who discarded their wives when they grew frail. Letters began to pour in, thanking us for restoring hope. One woman wrote, "You gave me back my name. I am not just a burden anymore." Every word reminded me that my pain had been transformed into purpose. Harold's gift was no longer just for me, it was for all of us. 5 years later, the garden in Riverton was alive with color. My granddaughter Isla, now 4 years old, ran barefoot across the grass chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the yard. Lena stood at the porch steps, her hands dusted with flour from preparing Sunday lunch. She had rebuilt her life, going back to school and becoming an accountant at a small but thriving firm. More importantly, she had regained that easy laugh I remembered from her childhood. That afternoon, an envelope arrived addressed to me. It was an invitation to the dedication of the third Second Porch home. Dozens more women would soon find safety and dignity within its walls. Later that week, Judge Marcus Ellery visited with his wife. He smiled warmly and said, "Nora, your work has inspired us all. The Retired Judges Association wants to honor you for what you've built." As Isla climbed into my lap holding a yellow flower, I realized how far we had come. Pain had been turned into legacy, and love had survived its hardest test. Looking back, I see now that true strength was never in shouting or fighting louder. It was in standing calmly with the truth in my hands, refusing to be erased. Harold's letter had told me to use power not to hurt but to teach, and that is what I tried to do. Lena learned that respect cannot be forced, and I learned that dignity is something we must protect for ourselves. If my story reminds you of your own, know this: you are not powerless. Even in the darkest moments, there is always a way to reclaim your voice, your place, and your worth. Sometimes life circles back with unexpected kindness, the way Judge Ellery remembered me after decades. Sometimes the victory is simply refusing to be pushed aside. If you found meaning here, I invite you to share this story. Leave a comment, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Together we can keep these lessons alive, reminding the world that dignity never expires.